Welcome everyone to talk number 5 in the Esoteric Easter series, which I'm very honored and privileged to and humbled by to give you in this time of great really trepidation on planet Earth. There's fears of World War III as I speak, but we know from our reading of the Urantia text, and this is a commentary on the Urantia Book, we know that that this is the planet of Jesus. This is the world of the cross. This is his favored world out of millions of inhabited planets in his local universe. So we will prevail, and we being the forces of light, and all of you and myself and all of us who are believers in this triumph of spirit on planet Earth. And this is best illustrated perhaps by the papers we're going to deal with this time and next time, because we're going to be witnesses in this discussion to the dignity with which Jesus went to his death, and the superb and endearing beauty of his resurrection appearances, which we hear of several in the Bible, but the Urantia Book tells us there were 19 appearances. We're going to get to those in the next talk, but in this talk number 5, we're in the dark period of Jesus being marched to Golgotha by the Roman guard on order by Pilate to be crucified. And you'll remember from last time that after the betrayal of Jesus by Judas, he was taken into a variety of trials, all of them basically fraudulent trials by various parties, they being the Jewish leaders, 2 different groups of them, then being Herod, and then finally Pilate. And Pilate but all of these trials and the way Jesus is treated by these people is illustrative of what he is up against, and what all of us are really up against, even today, in that there are those who insist on not following the golden rule. I mean, which is they are arrogant and they are hateful, and they can go so far as to unjustly decree the death of a prophet. Now, in the case of Pilate, it's not exactly injustice, but it's moral cowardice. And we learned last time that he actually did recognize Jesus was, in fact, innocent, and was, in fact, a great man. But he was manipulated by the Jewish leaders into, and basically blackmailed and threatened that if he did not order the execution of Jesus, that they would go above his head and get him in some serious trouble with the Emperor of Rome. So he really didn't have a choice unless he was to almost cause a rebellion among his subjects. So he surrendered and collapsed morally, and did indeed order the death of Jesus, knowing it was unfair, and showing the kind of moral cowardice and compromise that he's all about. Is he ordered his death, but then washed his hands of it. So this is a completely compromised position that this man takes, and it's no great surprise, you read in the Urantia Book, that somewhat later in life, Pilate committed suicide. Moving on from that is we're now witnessing Jesus being marched off to Golgotha with the Roman guard, and he's accompanied there. There's an entourage that's with him as he marches up with carrying the cross, just the cross beam, not the entire cross, on his shoulders, to the place of his death. When he gets there, we are presented with the details of how he's nailed to the cross, which is somewhat more detailed than the Bible. But we know from the Bible there was a single nail through each hand, and there was a long nail through his feet. This is affirmed in the Urantia Book with more of the grisly detail of the scene. But what's important about this scene is the dignity of the demeanor of Jesus through all of it. Not only that, but far transcending that is the fact that he was continuing to love those who were his executioners and torturers through this. He's doing what he can and finding every opportunity to, in essence, to bless them, to exemplify his teaching, which is to love our enemies, not just our friends. So, as they're nailing him to the cross, he's beginning to be subject to torture by being nailed to this wood. And he's interceding for them and asking God to forgive them, for they know not what they do. We know that from the Bible and from these amazing scenes in various movies. But the depiction here is so vivid, showing a man in kingly bearing and really with a courage and heroism that's unparalleled, so much so that one of the thieves next to him, the one on each side, as you know, one of them recognizes who this man is and had heard him before and had been to his teachings. And this guy, witnessing the heroism of Jesus on the cross along with him, has this kind of eruption of faith in his final hours. And Jesus accepts him and it gives and offers him the salvation that he's offered to all of us. And it's a beautiful scene of Jesus still ministering, even as he's being tortured, and still looking for who else he can provide blessing and love to and forgiveness to. And they narrate how the Roman guard is beginning to recognize that this man is a truly great man. They mock him as well. And others, of course, are mocking him, and we know from the Bible and other and biblical scenes and movies that he was being derided by those at the foot of the cross. But he's never attacking back. He's only tolerating, and he's basically blessing those who are cursing him. And the one of the great dramas is the story. One of the many wonderful subplots is the captain of the guard, the centurion, the Roman centurion, on site doing his job of executing Jesus, who becomes a tremendous figure in both in the Bible and especially in the Urantia Book, because he is really the key witness of what happens here. And at the moment and the hour of the death of Jesus, the Urantia Book makes clear that he had a conversion, and he came over to become a believer of Jesus because he saw the heroic, kingly bearing of Jesus and the loving attitude and forgiving attitude. And this was sufficient for this man to become not only a convert, but one of the few people able to narrate what actually happened, because John is present. The Apostle John, as you know, is present with Mary, but John is kind of moving back and forth. He's going to get Mary, then bringing her there. He's not present for everything. He's present for most of it. But his narration of this in the Gospel of John is written much later. But the narration of the centurion is of record immediately in the Christian community. So anyway, it's an important point to know that Jesus is still, his presence is commanding enough, that he's not somebody who's sinking into depression and grief and shame. He's somebody who's causing conversions all the way through to the end. And by the way, the Urantia Book very definitely corrects this terrible misapprehension from the Bible that Jesus cried out, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" And this is something that, all of us grew up with, grew up Christian, with this notion that Jesus, being our Savior, was at the very end, in the last hour, crying out, "Why have you forsaken me?" And this is deeply contradictory to the whole teaching and who he really was. And so one of the great things Urantia Book does is correct this and say that he happened to only be reciting, from Psalms 20, 21, and 22, his favorite Psalms apparently, at the very last minutes and hour as he was fading and dying. And he happened to recite the opening line of Psalm 22, "Father, why are you forsaking me?" He's just reciting a line. But those who were at the foot of the cross heard this and reported that he must have felt he was being forsaken by his Father. But it was Urantia Book makes it clear starkly that this is absolutely incorrect, and it's utterly the opposite, that Jesus was fulfilling the divine will, that he live a fully human life, that he die the way other humans die, that he not be rescued. He's not being forsaken. He's not expecting to be rescued. What he's doing is he's doing his Father's will, which is to experience what humans experience when they die. But it's even more so. He's experiencing the worst possible death. And of course, there's been others who have been crucified in history. And even to this day, people are tortured to death. And even our country, the United States, has tortured people to death, as we know from the torture chambers in Iraq during that war. So this still goes on. And we can look to Jesus as somebody who has experienced torture and the worst maltreatment imaginable, that he endured that, and he knows for a fact just how difficult life and death can be on this earth. So that is made clear to us in this corrective set of papers, and particularly paper 188, which tells us what the lessons are of the cross. Now, the cross is a symbol of something in Christianity, which the Urantia Book is going to deconstruct, and then it's going to reconstruct its meaning all anew, because Orthodox Christianity, especially Protestant Christianity, makes, but also Catholic Christianity makes a great point that the death of Jesus on the cross was something that was more or less orchestrated by the Father so that mankind could be reconciled to God through a sacrifice, through a ransom of an innocent person for guilty persons, that being humanity, who had inherited sin from Adam, from Adam's fall, and that we were tainted by this sin, and Jesus was a sacrifice that designed by divine fiat, really, to die as a sacrifice to atone through his blood for our sins. And the Urantia Book absolutely takes this on and refutes it with great force, and becomes one of the most important themes in the Urantia Book, is to exalt for us the idea of God, so that we can decontaminate it from really the superstitious idea that God is an angry monarch that must be appeased by the death of his own son. So I'm not going to rant to you about this, but I have ranted to my friends, many others, about this. And most of us Urantia folks, really find this to be an exalting new interpretation, a correction that changes our view of what love is, that the Father's love is pure, that it's not contaminated by a game, And the Urantia Book, calls this childish, barbaric, and superstitious idea of the atonement. So that's one of the lessons of the cross, is not that Jesus was a sacrifice, but to reconcile us to the Father. But it was not for reconciliation, but for realization, not reconciliation, to realize the depth of the love, the way that we are loved. So it's not just sort of a self-existing, beautiful, loving energy that's out there in the universe. It's a personal visitation of love, in this case, through the incarnation of a paradise being who comes really from, sitting at the right hand of the Father, so to speak, metaphorically, coming to love us personally by living as us and dying as us. So the correction here is to show Jesus revealing God to man in this new way, but an additional revelation of not only God to man, but also man to God. And this is a point made in the Urantia Book that's, I think, unique, that God is not learning something new about humankind through the incarnation of Jesus. God is infinite, all-knowing, omniscient, everything, all those attributes. But God is in a way taking into his bosom a new image of what man can be through his incarnate Son. But actually, more important, the Urantia Book states, is that the celestial host is learning something new about what humanity is in the cosmic scheme of things, that humanity can co-partner with divinity all the way to the utmost, to Father fusion, if you will, which is the ultimate exemplification that the two combined wills of man and God can fuse and become one. And what we're seeing with Jesus is the image of co-partnership in perfection that a human being named Jesus of Nazareth did achieve. So this is a new revelation of who and what we are and what we are capable of. And while even in our material sojourn on earth, we are capable of becoming one with the Father. That is, we can fuse with the Father fragment within. And Jesus did not choose to do that. He could have done that. We're told he could have done it at his baptism. He was ready for this fusion, as I pointed out in an earlier talk. But he held off because he was doing a ministry for us, not just for our planet. Remember, it's for other planets as well, other inhabited planets, and for higher worlds, for higher intelligences. Now, in this case, to see what human beings, what men and women really are capable of in the guise, or not in the guise, but through the example of Jesus. So there's many other points being made about the meaning of the cross. On high, we're known as the world of the cross. On high, they take the correct lesson here, which I pointed out, which is the lesson of a love and a forgiveness that has not really been envisioned before, because it's not just that Jesus forgave his executioners, his torturers, and the Jews, and all of them. He didn't just forgive them. Forgiveness means you set aside their wrongdoing. He's going further. He's not, certainly not condoning any of it, and he's not only forgiving it, but he's obliterating the evil that they do by his example, by the statement he's making. And this, for whatever reason, makes me think of Martin Luther King, and Gandhi, and prophets like that who teach us that hating our enemies, having revenge, and engaging in violent acts, even for the sake of justice, it does not transform the situation. We have to love our enemies so much so that they are transformed and moved into conversion, which we see with the centurion, we see with the thief on the cross, and we see down through the 2 millennia, that people take a look at this, at the cross, and they see, that they too can overcome what they're facing. And in fact, the Urantia Book says that on planets in the domain of Jesus, in the universes of Nebadon, that in his created universe of over 6 million inhabited planets, tens of trillions of beings on these planets look at this image of Jesus on the cross and take moral courage to face their own dilemmas and to carry their own cross, so to speak. That it's not, so his death is not just for us. It's certainly not just to reconcile the people of earth to God who were saved, who already had salvation. It's something else. It's something for his universe, and it's an illustration of what really, how redemptive love is. And they don't particularly like the word redemption in the Urantia Book. They prefer to think of Jesus as a savior. And if you want to call him a redeemer, it's a redemption in the sense that he's rehabilitating our evil tendencies through his example. So this and many other things are the lessons on the cross. And I got to tell you that I'm almost, it's almost embarrassing to try to sum this up. So I've made a new. This time I've been bold enough to isolate what I think are the best quotes in these papers to provide them to you. But that was really humbling, because it's almost impossible to find good quotes among other good quotes. I really urge you to read these, in particular paper 188 and 180. Well, all the papers. But anyway, there's the death of Jesus. The body is now been taken down from the cross. And we have another unbelievable scene. I mean, it's just so many, where the body is now down on the ground at the foot of the cross. And the Jewish leaders have sent agents of theirs to get the body. They want to take the body of Jesus and dispose of it where bodies are sent, where bodies are taken after they've been crucified. And this is basically a pit that they want to, that the body will be, ravaged and eaten by wild beasts. And this is where they want to take him. But Joseph of Arimathea, who's a very important character here at the end, one of the Pharisees, as you know, has an order from Pilate to get the body so that he can bury him in his own burial tomb. So Joseph has this written order, and the Jewish leaders converge on the cross, the body, just at the same time he does, with this written decree. And they want to seize the body, but the centurion, the captain, prevents that because there's an order from his commander. But they almost have a riot, and it's a Shakespearean kind of scene that these infuriated Jews try to seize the body violently. What a thing to do after bringing about his death. Now they're trying to abscond with the body, despite the order, the legal order. But the guards have to, there's a lot of the Roman guards there. They have to pull their swords and protect the body of Jesus from these rioters. Anyway, Joseph and 3 others, including the centurion and John, carry the body to the tomb, which is not very far away. And they quickly put the body in the tomb because it's Sabbath, and the prep for Sabbath, and they have to hurry back to Jerusalem for the observance. So they do not anoint the body properly. They do a little bit of that. But there were women following all of this. And don't forget, there's a very moving and beautiful and endearing part of the story, both in the Bible, but especially the Urantia Book, of the role of the women through all of this. The women are the ones that are there at the cross. They're there when he expires. Now there's two men, but the women are Mary Magdalene. There's Mary, the mother of Jesus. There's there's Ruth, his youngest sister. John the Apostle was there for most of the time, and one or two others, women who then and there's women who are there, not right at the foot, but are nearby, and they follow the body to the tomb, and they affirm among themselves secretly, because they're not even seen by the men, that they're going to come back and properly anoint the body, which is pretty remarkable, because that sets up the important scene of the resurrection 2 days later, that they're coming back to anoint the body properly according to the Jewish tradition and custom of basically it's kind of an embalming that they do. And so the women are waiting on the Sabbath day. And they have a meeting place at the home of Nicodemus. Nicodemus being the other great Pharisee who is harboring, these fugitives, basically, the believers and the apostles and disciples of Jesus, and the women's core, led by Mary Magdalene. So the women, they narrate what happens to the apostles during the intervening time. They're hiding. They're back in the same place where they had the Last Supper, the home of John Mark, the youngster that was part of their entourage. They're hiding, and it might seem a little cowardly, but they're doing the right thing. That they should not be in public, because they too could be put to the death if they were discovered. So they're marooned in this upper room, in grief, of course, and the women are in their place, and Jesus' family is at another location nearby. His entire family is nearby in Bethany. So this is the scene. These are the characters who are now the next morning going to be the witnesses, the primary early witnesses to the resurrection of Jesus, and they're all assembled in Jerusalem. So we come to the end of this section of papers with paper 189, which narrates the initial story of the resurrection, and what a glorious paper this is. But amazingly, this paper is also sort of a technical discussion, because you're trying to set the record straight for Christianity. They're addressing Christian theologians, the body of Christ, and correcting those things which were misunderstood. I mean, understandably, these things were misinterpreted by the witnesses, because, in particular, the witnesses to the resurrection. Well, actually, the witnesses to the empty tomb are the women coming, of course, the morning of Easter. These women are coming, as I said, to anoint the body, and somehow somebody's going to roll away the stone. I don't know what they thought, who was going to do it. They were going to get the Roman guards to do it, I suppose, and they were going to get in there and anoint the body properly. So they then are the first witnesses of the empty tomb. And of course, there's the great scene that I really love of Mary Magdalene they arrive on the scene, and the stone is already rolled away. What a great and astonishing shock for them! And all the guards are gone, and they're out. They're just stunned in amazement. But Mary, being the true leader that she is, the kind of entrepreneurial personality who makes bold to go into the empty tomb, in almost in terror, really, like what happened to the body, and she sees the bandages and the grave cloths just sitting there intact. So what it looks like is there has been, first of all, they don't recognize this is he's been resurrected, but of course they now soon found that out. But Christians thought that the body itself had resurrected. The body of Jesus had resurrected physically. Now, that's an important notion. And for me personally, I've always really loved this notion that he could bodily resurrect because of the great beauty that spirit is reconciled, you might say, with the body. Spirit and matter are beautifully united in this resurrection of the body. So many great philosophic, theologic ideas come out of this, but it's not correct. It's only, as you know, it's only that the body of Jesus, that the form of Jesus resurrected in its Urantia form. And for those of you new, that's the subtle form. It's not the spirit form, but it's like the ghostly form, so to speak, has resurrected and come forth. So all of you who have the romantic notion, you might say, that the body is redeemed in a certain way by the resurrection, this is corrected. The body still is redeemed anyway, and we don't need this. But it leads to some strange theological notions, which I cover in my book in chapter 6. If you care to look this up, I think it's very important that Christians believe in the resurrection of our bodies, that this is how we go to heaven. So we resurrect bodily, and we are sort of exalted physical beings in heaven. The way they conceive Jesus resurrected physically. It goes up and ascends bodily. And they think we do too. But the Urantia Book has this important teaching, which is that there's transitional state from the body to the spirit that they call Urantia, this intervening subtle aspect of physical, post-physical energy. So what is happening to Jesus? For those of you that know this story, it's a repetition, but important to contemplate, that Jesus is now sort of incarnating in the first levels of the afterlife. He's in the form that we are in the afterlife, and our form is being keyed to more and more subtle vibrations in what is called the seven mansion world. This is the immediate afterlife. So what Jesus is doing during this period of time is kind of double duty. He's up there, so to speak, with the Urantia survivors of death in the lower worlds of heaven. He's there. And there's even a monument in the resurrection hall in the first of these so-called mansion worlds, certifying that Jesus resurrected there. Of course, this resurrection was unique in lots of ways. He didn't actually resurrect in a resurrection chamber up there. He resurrected in his burial chamber down here, and that's unique. And they tell you how that was done. If you care to read the technical details, I find it fascinating. But he comes forth not physically. His body is dissolved by the archangels and their associates. Right there, it's dissolved instantly by them because they didn't want to leave the body to decompose. Even, he had resurrected, so that's how they take care of that. So now Jesus is outside the tomb. Mary comes with these other women. They tell you who the women are. They make a long story short, you know what happens. Jesus appears to Mary first, Mary Magdalene. Then he disappears. So what is happening is his Urantia form is being calibrated, and the eyes of these witnesses are being somehow managed, calibrated, so they can see his form. And it's one of the most stirring things you can read. And so just go back and read it for yourself. And so we come now to the end of this discussion. We're going to have 5 more papers to go, all of them having to do with the resurrection and the 19 appearances, and then several papers on the Pentecost, which is about 40 days after these events. So I'm going to present this to you pretty soon so we can conclude. And I thank you so much for hearing me out on this, and I hope I've inspired you to take this in and study this. I think the upshot of the whole thing is that Jesus has come to us in so many different ways. He's come to us physically as a human being. He's come to us morantually in resurrection, and he's come to us by sending his Spirit of truth in the Pentecost, which we will learn next in the final talk in Esoteric Easter. So I thank you so much, and God bless you.